A Disobedient Girl, a Novel by Freeman. Narrated by Flosnik. Copyright 2009 by Ruvani Seneviratna Freeman. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Atria Books, a division of Simon & Schuster, Inc., and was produced in the year 2009 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Part 1. Lata. She loved fine things, and she had no doubt that she deserved them. That is why it had not felt like stealing when she'd helped herself to one of the oval cakes that were stacked in the cabinet underneath the bathroom sink in the main house. Who would care if one went missing from the 7 sitting there, awaiting their turn in the rectangular ceramic soap dish bought at Lanka Tiles to match the new pale green bathroom towels? And since she had been right and nobody had noticed, it was now a reliable source of luxury. When one wore out, which it didn't for several months, she simply fetched herself another. Every day at 3:30 p.m. she cleaned her face, feet, underarms and hands at the well, using one of those cakes of Lux, which, despite having escaped undetected with thieving, not daring to smell like flowers all day long, she reserved for this ritual. Every day the soap, pink and fragranced, filled her nostrils with the idea of roses. She had seen real roses only once. That had been when the Vitanigays had taken her with them on a trip to the hill country one April. She had been 5 or 6 then, her second year with them, back when her duties had been few and blissfully pleasing. The hill country, with its lush, verdant cleanliness, the ice-cold brooks, and the famous Vealuma waterfall, at whose foot she had stood as part of the family, or their faces sprayed with mist, wet with the tears that the particular slant of the falls, airbrushed water in slow motion, invariably brought on. After the falls they had driven down for a picnic at the gardens of Hakala, where the roses bloomed in such perfection that only their scent distinguished them from the artificial creations sold in Colombo. From that day on, roses had become a delicious prospect, a memory and a luxury blending together on her face, caressing her. Today, as always, she felt sad, as the relatively warm well water took the bubbles and the smell down the sloped pavement and evaporated both instantly between the blades of grass at her feet. She straightened up and looked off into the distance, smelling the tendrils of hair that hung long and wet down both sides of her face. She used her left hand to gather the strands nudging her right cheek, that being a more dramatic gesture, she thought, than using her right hand. This was the moment when, in her soggy state, she imagined herself into a teledrama, playing the role of the beautiful yet discarded maiden, surrounded by the soft aura of the virtuous wronged. Next to the presence of finery, she also felt quite strongly that her life should unfold with a minimum of 3 square helpings of drama, as soul-minding and body-feeding as a plate of rice or bread she was given at each meal. The old well at the edge of the garden, which was used only for washing clothes, and in her case for bathing, and which therefore she considered an extension of the spaces that belonged to her, was the perfect place to dwell on those fantasies and to populate them with characters propelled by passion, wrongdoing, and guts. Lata! Lata! That call was part of this late afternoon event too, the sound of Tara's voice calling her from the veranda, making sure that she hadn't gone without her. The maiden went the way of the soapy bubbles, and Lata returned to being 11 years old again. Enava Tara Baba! After all this time she still felt silly saying it. Baba. How could someone her own age be a baby? She picked up her tin bucket, the soap hidden beneath her washed underwear, and headed toward the house. Tara met her halfway down the path. "Can we go to that street again today?" she asked, linking arms with Lata. "Nay, Tara Baba, I'm going to get into trouble because of you." She said it because she wanted to put a check mark in her head after the word tried. After all, who could fault her for being an accomplice to Tara's misdemeanors if she had tried to dissuade her? It was one of the first English words she had learned at school. Try, and try again. The school principal still insisted that they chant this every morning, and though there were rumors that he sympathized with the people who wore red and marched with banners embroidered with the sickle and hammer on May Day, and that his job was a front for spreading a doctrine that encouraged his students to think themselves equal to the rich, and though all of that was considered dangerous and subversive, his message, and frankly his possibly clandestine life, resonated with Lata. She had resolved to follow her own interpretation of his creed. She might get it wrong, and she might get into trouble, but by God she would try to be better than she was. Next to her, Tara giggled happily. It was time for the flowers. The flowers they picked from other people's gardens were various, and arranging them was Lata's specialty. She liked to get an assortment, but favored the pastels. Rings of white Vathu Sudha, studded here and there with small-petaled yolk-yellow Aralia, her favorite flower. Sometimes a small sprig of Ixora for a splash of red, even though the plant was considered poisonous to the mind by some who sounded like they knew these things. Soma, the old servant, for instance, with her faded clothes and neatly whittled hands that carried vegetables like pliant but precious gems, testing their firmness with the press of concave fingernails. Every now and again, if she was lucky, a fresh, new-blooming gardenia that needed nothing else. Its perfume, its satin skin, its very existence enough of a reminder of highs and lows, being and death. But lately it wasn't the flowers that Tara was after. It was the boy. The boy lived on the street that paralleled theirs, within the same Colombo 7 neighborhood. Tara had explained it all to Lata one day, checking off the necessary requirements on the fingers of one hand. Race, religion, caste, school, looks. Of these, Tara cared about the last 2. The other 3 were for her parents' benefit. Of course, the right address was the icing on the cake. Colombo 7 is best. Next is Colombo 3, Colpetti. After that, well, Colombo 5, and then maybe, if everything else is absolutely perfect, even the money, then Colombo 6. Nothing else. Amma would never tolerate it, so why bother? Right? Right, Lata? Why bother? Might as well stick with the known crowd. I'd never go for a marriage proposal, so might as well bring home someone they can stand. What if the marriage proposal is better? Lata had asked. How can it be? If they could find someone by themselves, would they ask a Kapuwa to do the work for them? No. Only uglets with cowcatcher teeth come calling with their mothers in tow, the matchmaker with his pointy black umbrella leading the way. Not for me. I'm going to find him for myself, even if I have to grow old doing it. Well, she had found him all right, and before her 12th birthday, and living in the right kind of house to boot. Despite Lata's reservations, she had to approve of her young mistress's resolve and enterprise, and not only because Ajit came complete with a friend. Gihan. That was a bonus. Gihan was probably destined to be one of those who would have to rely on a matchmaker to find himself a wife. Lata felt certain of that. He had none of Ajit's grace or good looks, none of that air of knowing his place in the world. He was a hanger-on, and completely ordinary. Lata was sure she had passed by him dozens of times on her treks to the stalls that bordered the cricket grounds to buy mangoes seasoned with chili and salt from the street vendors. Yes, he had been there, buying pineapples or maybe olives. He looked like an olive-eater. Her mouth watered as she imagined the taste of a boiled green olive, the vinegar and spice orchestrating its small earthquake on her tongue. She could see him spitting the seeds onto the sidewalk. Not like Ajit and Tara, or even herself. They all knew how to get rid of pits discreetly. She sighed. Well, no matter. They came as a pair, and Gihan would always be available whenever Ajit was, and she was hardly likely to find a romantic interest anywhere else, no matter how deserved that outcome would be. "Want to try stealing today?" Tara had asked her the day they found the boy. "Gee, I can't steal." "Come on, it's more fun," Tara begged. "No, Baba, I can't let you do that," Lata said. "It's a sin. How can we pray with stolen flowers?" "Why not? If everything must come to an end and die, then how is a stolen flower different from any other flower?" Tara practiced her latest coquetry, shaking her head from side to side so her shoulder-length ponytails whipped the sides of her cheeks. Lata's hair came down in waves, and she thought it was prettier than Tara's, but Mrs. Vithanage, Tara's mother, had insisted that Lata wear hers in tight plaits. Sometimes she practiced the cheek whip when nobody was home, but it never looked the way it did for Tara, whose straight silky hair brushed her face like it loved it. When Lata tried it, her hair, thick and heavy, refused to cooperate, hanging down the sides of her face and making her look like the bad women in the teledramas, the ones whom the village ostracized or husbands left their wives for. She consoled herself then by noting that they got a lot more screen time than the good women with smooth, broad foreheads who parted their hair in the middle and never changed styles. "In fact," Tara continued, "it's a better flower to offer. It reminds us that there is evil in life. Nothing can last, and we must remain unmoved by these things." "But shouldn't we remember what the priest said about not stealing? What about the 5 precepts?" Lata asked, trying again. "Why do you want to bring the precepts into this? We're just talking about the flowers." Tara flung up her hands. The bangles she put on in the evenings went tinkling down her thin forearms and gathered at the joints in her elbows. She cocked her arms and shook the bangles down to her wrists again. She looked funny doing that, like a chicken flapping its wings. Lata smiled just a little. They must look like sisters standing face to face like that, except for their feet, one set smooth and sandaled, the other ashy and slippered, and the bangles, of course. Lata didn't own any bangles. Her eyes followed the movement of Tara's arms, staying one jingle behind the narrow circles of glass. Finally Tara stopped, her fists dug into her waist, waiting for a response. "But if we steal the flowers, then we're breaking the precepts. There is a right way to get flowers and a wrong way to do it." This was Lata's last try. "There is no right and wrong, and precepts are for fools. Everything is just as it is, and we must experience things without condemning them, because if we condemn them, then we're becoming too involved. That's what I think the priest meant when he talked about it last Sunday at temple." "I don't understand all these things." Lata shook her head and looked miserably at her empty Sinsin bag, fiddling with it and causing it to make the soft tissuey squeak that gave it its name. Tara pushed out her lips and scratched a mosquito bite on her chin. Suddenly she grinned. "How about this? The flower must remain unmoved by being stolen or being picked with permission or even by dying. We can remember that as we recite our prayers this evening if you like," she said, her cajoling beginning to wear Lata down. "Besides, it would be quicker." Tara was right about that bit at least. Half the time when they went flower-gathering, they would have to leave because nobody was home to ask, even when there were so many blooms on some bushes that the owners would never have noticed it if they had picked a few on their way out. Besides, wouldn't they be creating merit for the owners by using their flowers for prayers? Lata squared her shoulders and nodded. "Ha ahenang," she said, relenting. The first 3 houses were easy. There were no gates, and, more important, no dogs. But the 4th presented a series of problems, the largest of which was a grandmother moving about, albeit slowly, in the house. They watched her for a few minutes, hidden from view behind a short and somewhat prickly hedge. "Hopefully she's deaf," Tara said. Lata suppressed a giggle. She felt a warm, pleasant excitement gather between her legs, like wanting to pee and never being able to pee again, both at the same time. She clutched Tara's arm. "I'll keep watch, Papa. You get the flowers," Lata said, warming to this new sensation brought on by good intentions and bad behavior. "No, you pick them and I'll keep an eye on the old cow." Tara shoved Lata away from her and onto the gravel driveway. Lata scurried across it and pasted herself against the trunk of the Aurelia tree. But the very characteristics that made it so lovely to have in a garden, the low, spread-apart branches, the thick, large, moisture-rich leaves, the bunches of waxy yellow blossoms, all these ensured that it provided very little cover for an 11-year-old girl in a bright blue puff-sleeved dress. It was a tree meant for love-making, a leaning tree, not a tree for hiding from grandmothers. "Kauda!" The voice was at once beseeching and nasty. The old lady, dressed in a housecoat of indefinite hue and cut, was at the window, shading her eyes and peering into the garden. The pee began to leak into Lata's underwear. Tears threatened to start up top. Tara was gesticulating wildly from behind the hedge, mouthing a word Lata could not understand. Run? Come? Maybe she was just gaping. After one last and somewhat manic series of gesticulations, Tara grimaced at Lata and stepped out from behind the bushes. She walked boldly to the front door and rang the bell. It had a tinny, high-pitched sound, entirely at odds with the dimensions of the soaring pillars and beams that made up the house, built in the style of a walawa. The boy opened the door before the bell stopped ringing and grinned at her. Lata was just about to step out from her ineffectual hiding place when she heard the sly, teasing hiss behind her. And that was how she met Gihan. "So how many of those flowers are stolen?" "Na, uppy," she said, looking somewhere off to the right of his left shoulder, but instantly aware of everything about him. That his blue checked shirt was the same color as her dress, that he wore khaki shorts and barter slippers like hers, that his hair stood up on end along the path where he had just run his hand through it, like a sculpture, that he was very brown, browner even than she became during cricket season, when she and Tara climbed the roof of their house to watch the games. One more thing. He was wiry and elongated, like a reedy plant reaching for sunlight through dense shrubs. Everything concentrated on the upward journey, just the barest of threads for roots. "Don't worry, I won't tell. I'll even pick a few more for you. Look, here, take these." Why did he have to pick the entire bunch? She always made it a point to pick only the blooms. She couldn't stop herself. "Ayo, don't pick the buds. You're wasting the flowers." "You're wasting the flowers," he mimicked. "So what? There are at least 200 on this tree, and tomorrow 200 more." Lata frowned at the bunch he had picked in its entirety off the tree, her favorite flowers in all their golden sun and moon beauty. He wouldn't put them down, but continued to hold them in his outstretched hand. He looked ridiculous, a romantic hero without the face or manner for it. Milky white sap was dripping onto his dusty slippers. There was dirt under his toenails. He shuffled his feet under her stare. She sighed and took the offering, stooping to rub the stem in the dirt to stop the bleeding. She turned to go, then paused. "Thank you," she said over her shoulder, pouting her mouth as she said it. He smiled, and she felt happy. Perhaps he had not guessed that she was a servant. She tried to ape Tara's confidence as she walked over to join her at the door. Tara's voice brought her back to the present. "Come, Lata, let's go before Amma gets home," Tara shouted as she ran to get their bags for the day's picking. "Just give me a minute to change my dress. I'll meet you by the gate." Tara stopped running and turned around. "Change your dress? What are you changing your dress for? That one looks fine." "But I've been helping Somanenda in the kitchen, and it smells like curries, and anyway it's wet now." "It'll dry as we walk, and nobody's going to smell you after all, so what's the point of changing?" "I'll meet you by the gate," she said, and ran away before Tara could argue. She went into the storeroom, where she slept between the padlocked hall petia full of dry goods and spices and the barrel full of unhusked rice, and she put her soap away on the wooden shelf next to her mat, hiding it carefully behind an old Vesak card with a picture of the Sri Mahabodhya on the front. She spread her towel and wet clothes on the rack near the door. Then she climbed on the low bench and took her blue dress off the coir rope where she had hung it to air after the last time. If she was going to get into trouble, she wasn't about to let Tara bully her about her dress. She slipped on the thin leather slippers that had once belonged to somebody, a relative of Tara's, who was a school teacher, she imagined. They were that kind, flat, unflattering, and noisy. They were a size too big for her, and she had to grip them with her toes when she walked. But at least they were not her old rubber slippers. At least they made her feel dressed up. She checked the picture of the English princess that she had cut out of the newspaper and pasted inside one of her exercise books. Lata had taken to the princess afresh, since she'd read in the accompanying article that she had been a nobody and a nanny who looked after other people's children before she decided to become a princess instead. Having confirmed that indeed the look she had been practicing, peering out with her chin tucked but her eyes uplifted, had been properly copied, Lata stepped out. Then she went back into the storeroom and lightly stroked the still moist surface of her soap. She rubbed the tips of her fingers on her wrist, then rubbed her wrists together like she had seen Tara do when she wore her mother's perfume. Now she was ready. "Be so. I have mended his slippers, frayed, old, pinned together between the toes. This is the most that is possible. The temple bells are ringing. I pay heed, though their sweetness has been lost to me for years. I see him before the last chimes fade, picking his way through the mangrove swamps. Beyond him the sea. I would go to the water if I knew it would not humble me. Twice I tried, walking into the blue, two in one hand, one in the other, singing. But when the waves broke over us, I half drowned to save them, dragging their confused bodies to shore until that too became mere play. No, no more of the hot-brined sand under our feet, no more rituals to stave off my madness. We will go to the cold green hills, to the slopes of tea and the music of waterfalls. I will make them forget." There is a full moon tonight, and the children wait, just out of sight in the kitchen behind me, still dressed in their white school uniforms, waiting to light lamps and incense around the bo tree. I press into the splintered frame of the door as he pushes past me. "Move, Vesi!" I cast my eyes down at my feet, but I stay where I am. Whore, bitch, cunt. Words that came calling with such fury the first time, but lost their effect so soon. He looks confused, but staggers indoors. I wipe his spit off the front of my blouse with the edge of my sari, and raise my eyes to my children. They scamper to my side, little mice. Outside, the air is moist, and Lokuputa leads the way. He has his father's walk, his face, his movements, the same quick eyes, the same rare smile, but he is still only 9 years old. Give me 2 years, and with the grace of the gods he shall not become his father. My firstborn daughter stumbles over some hidden root, and he turns to catch her. He grabs her hand, steadies her, then shakes it off. He clips the side of her head with his knuckles and wipes his hand on his shirt as though she were tainted. "Watch where you are going, pissy," he adds, and looks defiantly at me. Her face wrinkles. "Aya called me an idiot." "It's okay, Lokudua. Stay here next to me," I say, and take her hand in mine. My youngest, the baby, glances at us, then runs ahead to join her brother. "She'll fall before we reach the temple." She sounds as if she wishes that upon her younger sister. A fall, a scream, tears, a bloody knee, a ruined evening, blame. I sigh and stroke my daughter's hair, trying to ease her older sister conundrums, jealousies and concerns twisting together, inseparable. The chanting of the priests floats over the sound of the sea. The smells of oil, incense, frangipani, jasmine, and lotus mix with the taste of sea salt on my tongue. It calms me. I heave another sigh, audible and long, and feel my anxieties rise up out of my body and drift away. A boy about my son's age accosts us. He wears a banyan and a pair of shorts that are too small for him. 5 cents to look after all your slippers, he says. "That's all right, Puta. We'll leave them here," I say, and stroke his head. He smiles but ducks from under my palm, moving on to other potential customers. Nobody steals slippers at temples, and yet there are people who pay to have them watched, as if they had not come to temple to meditate on the transience of their lives, on the irrationality of clinging to their possessions. We leave our slippers in a dark corner outside the temple walls and climb the 33 worn steps to the top. Once there, I wiggle my toes in the liquid sea sand and smile. Despite all that has happened to me in this town, I have always loved this temple. Each full moon I have come here, alone at first, then with my firstborn, my Lokuputa, to watch him crawl on all fours at the roots of the holy bo tree, then with both of them, my son and daughter, and now with all my children. I used to come here with Siri when the moon was not full, when the temple was likely to be empty. We would come here to light a lamp and to reflect upon how insignificant we were when alone in the scheme of things, in the same way that our flowers lay dying before our eyes at the clean, empty shrines. 2 flowers, 2 sticks of incense, 2 people, and all of the Buddha's teachings surrounding us in the quiet. But on Poya days like this, the moon full and low over the ocean, like a lantern we ourselves had reached up to light, I came with my children to forget that lesson, to do what a mother must, to take heart in the crowds of people, in their essential goodness, in the arrays of flowers piled high and seemingly abundant with life and hope.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?